goes. Welcome to the last show on Televida. A few weeks back we had Joe Nichols on, and the show went by so quick. We just talked about weather. So Joe's been nice enough to come back on a second time, and ironically, wear the exact same clothes
I know.
as 3 weeks ago.
Well,
It's
you know
amazing.
what? It makes it easy when you live in your car. So I just stayed parked outside the studio, and when you came to the window and said, "We're ready!"
We're ready.
I was already dressed, and here I am.
So there's a whole pop culture thing that I was intrigued with, because you actually transcended weather and got to interview people you like, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and I think from that you became the go-to guy. I don't want to say the TMZ guy, but the pop culture, the Entertainment Tonight portion of the local news was kind of offloaded to you, right?
I got a chance to do a lot of fun things. Absolutely.
Who was the most famous person you interviewed?
You know that you're going to have to help me with this, because I interviewed Bill Murray. He's pretty famous.
He's very famous.
I interviewed
That's it.
Billy Bob Thornton. He's pretty famous.
Not like Billy Bob. That's his name, by the way.
Yeah.
That's only an actor can have the name Billy Bob, right?
And
you can have a cardiologist and say, "This is your cardiologist, Billy Bob."
But he likes to be called Bud.
Are you serious?
Yeah, Bud Thornton, because he grew up being called Bud.
Billy Bob was just a celebrity thing.
So there you go. And or Kevin Bacon. Now I'm trying to think of famous people.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some kind of famous people.
So the Zen and Tao of Bill Murray. You have to tell me about what's it like to interview Bill Murray. How did that come up?
Well, that was very, very early in my time here.
Was he SNL Bill Murray, or
nope,
was he
Bill
Caddyshack Murray?
He was Scrooged Bill Murray.
Okay.
So when I was, there would be these things called junkets.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you were, and the movie studios would pay for you to come to New York or LA or somewhere.
So instead of a movie guy, they sent you.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And so the news director at Channel 9 at the time came to me and said, "Would you be interested in going to New York? And the movie is called Scrooged, and you would interview Bill Murray and Alfre Woodard and
Bobcat Goldthwait,
and some other folks from this movie."
Yeah.
And I said, "Sure, I've never even been to New York. I had never been to New York. I was just a kid." So I said, "Absolutely." So I went to New York, and we all watched the movie the night before, all of us from the various TV stations.
Oh, that's how they do
so
that. Okay.
We'd all get on a bus, go to a theater, watch the movie, come back. We'd be given a big, a folder full of information, and then you'd go and interview people. Now we didn't have, like with Afterwards or Nichols at Night, I'd have 20 minutes. I could talk to Elliot Threek for 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But on these things, you'd have 5 or 6 minutes, really. You didn't have a lot of time. And all of the other interviewers had more experience than I did. And all of them.
But you're a creative guy. I mean, what you want to do when you're like in a cattle call line, you want to ask some questions that haven't been asked.
You'd
right?
like to get to those.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the people that I was talking to who had done many, many more of these than I had, a couple of them said, "Oh, wonder which Bill Murray's going to show up, because is it going to be, happy-go-lucky fun Bill Murray, or is it going to be Bill Murray who doesn't really want to be here to do this?"
Or where you are in the lineup, to ask him. I mean, I want to be the second guy to ask questions,
well, I don't,
not the 44th.
I was probably third or fourth.
Okay, that's not bad.
And so I'm thinking, well, I hope he's a nice guy, because I've always loved him, watching him on SNL and everything else. And I went in. He could not have been nicer and funnier. And he knew I was just a kid, barely there. And he said, "So is this your first junket?" I said, "Yep, I'm a junketeer, I guess." And he looked at me. I said, "It's a Musketeer on steroids." And he laughed. And I thought, Bill Murray laughed.
Exactly.
We're okay.
Well, you're not from that. I mean, he's from Chicago. You're from Madison.
Yeah.
So you're from the same kind of.
And we talked a little about that,
stream.
about him, not me growing up, but where he grew up, and how having all his brothers were staying with him when he made Scrooged, and what Christmas was like, and it was a 5 or 6 minute interview, and he was great, and he was funny, and he was kind and considerate to me. And when we got done, he kind of leaned back. He said, "Yeah, that was fun. You're a funny guy." And I thought, wow.
That's it.
So I've never won any big awards, but whenever my kids said, "You're a loser," I'd say, "Look at this. Bill Murray said I was funny once in my life."
It's funny, the fact that Brian Doyle Murray lives here. You know that, right?
I don't know that.
Yes. Brian Doyle Murray, the older Murray, right? Yeah. From Groundhog's Day and all these other, yeah. Well, how does he end up here? Well, he married a woman there. So every once in a while, when somebody shows up at the comedy club, like Emo Phillips or Bobcat Goldthwait, Brian Doyle Murray.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Park. I assume he still lives in Overland Park, comes up. And every once in a while, Bill Murray comes to Kansas City to see him.
How great is that?
And I don't know how he sneaks into town.
Right.
How he stays unubiquitous. That's the word we keep on using here. to just do that. So Bill Murray.
So he was like the very first kind of famous
was the first
person
big
I
person.
interviewed. Yeah.
Now, did that move the needle with your kids?
Oh, sure. They were excited because they loved Scrooge. We all
Mhm.
went to the movie then. Although, let me think about this. I don't think my kids didn't see the movie then because most of them weren't born yet.
Mhm.
But years later, we got the DVD and they loved the movie and they loved Bill Murray.
Now, let me ask you this because I'm again, you've been on the air. This is like Conan interviewing Carson because you've been on the air so long. But in my house, there's an indifference with me performing or anything media. I used to have a radio show. They never listen to me.
Right.
They never watch me. Is that just me, or is that your family too?
No, it's you. No. The truth is, they didn't.
They don't watch you, right?
They
Your
didn't
family
really
don't
watch. I
they
mean,
don't
when
care.
I was on in the mornings, they might kind of just make sure I hadn't had a stroke on the drive to work. But they didn't watch a lot, and they didn't watch the interview shows that much because they were on late at night. As they've gotten older, they've kind of. The trouble for me is that if I sit and watch MeTV or any of these nostalgia channels, almost every dead star I've interviewed. They'll pop, oh, that's Don Knotts. I interviewed Don Knotts.
Oh my God.
And so they sit there next to me and they go, Dad, we know you interviewed that guy. Just shush. So
they all came through Tiffany's, Don Knotts,
right.
all those
so
guys.
They all came through New Theater, or Tiffany's Attic, or whatever. And so I'll sit there and I'll go, oh yeah, I talked to him. Oh yeah, and they'll be, Dad, please go away.
Well, what I like about MeTV is that now it's not like Game of Thrones where I have to watch everything. Every show had a beginning, middle, and end, and I could just jump in at any time, like a Seinfeld, like the Jeffersons, or like any of those shows.
Right.
Mayberry in particular, right? You could just jump in, watch everything, and bring it back there. So tell me, so then you segue into longer form interviews, right? Now this is a little bit harder because now they know that it's not going to be a junket. This guy's going to ask me 20 minutes. How do they know that you know what you're talking about? I mean, that's a lot of time for these celebrities, first of all, to commit to somebody they don't know, they've never heard of.
And the other thing is with the junkets, whether it was, because I did junkets, that first one with Bill Murray was just great. I was so excited. I did a junket where I interviewed Tom Selleck about some movie he was in. I interviewed Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder.
Whoa.
About a movie they were in.
Stop.
Yeah.
Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder?
Yeah, together.
Richard Pryor of the Sunset Strip, Gene Wilder of Willy Wonka.
Yeah.
What? Oh my God!
The movie "See No Evil, Hear No Evil."
Oh,
it was their last movie together.
The last movie together, yeah. I do remember that in his book there because his Pryor's MS was kind of
right.
Well after Gilda passed. So what did they? I have to stop and ask about this. You interviewed them both together?
Yeah, because they were doing the junkets together.
Oh my God!
And so you get ushered in and you meet this royalty, and it is overwhelming. Now within the 5 minutes, you do have to talk about the movie. That's why they're there. They want to promote the movie, so you don't have time to talk about a lot of other things. So you talk about the movie and then you try to make it within the context of maybe their life in some way. But for both of these men, they were both facing these huge life-changing times because Gilda Radner was dying.
Dying.
And Richard Pryor was dealing with MS. So they were both dealing with these things, and you could see could not have been nicer. They were nice and warm and funny and great together and great to little yahoos like me who were talking to them. But you could see some pain in there. There was pain in their eyes because they were going through life.
In Richard Pryor's book, he actually talks about that, and that was the last movie he did,
right? Where
they said cut, and he referenced it. When a baseball player, has his last thing, he runs around and hits everything, but it was just kind of a sterile room where they just said that's a wrap, and it was a momentous moment to him, but not to anybody else.
Yeah.
It's funny you should mention Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder because the movie that everybody knows that team got together is a movie called Silver Street.
Right.
Most famous scene was when it's politically incorrect now, where he puts blackface on Gene Wilder and walks through supposedly the aforementioned Union Station in Kansas City.
Right.
Remember that?
Right. Yeah, and trying to walk cool.
Old guy
trying
references
to be cool.
on Televida. The old guy references.
Trying to be cool.
Nobody
right?
young will get that. Yeah, exactly. So do you still have all those? All that footage? I mean, you have to keep those,
I don't know if I have much of it anymore, to be honest with you.
That's gotta be maddening, doesn't it?
I mean, I remember.
Did you have a way to save it back then?
Not as easily.
You didn't tell your wife to pop a VHS
Not as easily as you could now. But it was a great thing, and so then I can at least remember those 10 minutes we had together. That's pretty cool. But the longer thing came along because ABC decided to do overnight news. And so that meant that Channel 9...
You're talking about Ted Koppel, Nightline, or something?
Well, it meant that from the end of Nightline and on Channel 9, you had sitcoms and then Nightline. and then you were going to have overnight news. So you had these little blocks of about a half hour, 45 minutes to an hour that we didn't have anything to put in there. You could put in infomercials, but our news director at the time said, I don't want to just do infomercials. Let's do a show. Do you want to do an interview show? And I said, I would love to. So we started to do a show called Afterwards, which would air in that little weird time after.
It wasn't called Nichols at Night at the time.
It was called Afterwards.
Afterwards.
And so we did that for like 15 years on Channel 9. And then when I went to Channel 41, the then news director had become the GM of 41. And he said, we've got to do a version of Afterwards. And that's when we called it Nichols at Night. And so, which I would never have called it Nichols at Night. That was somebody else's idea. And when my wife heard the title of the show, she said, that is not true at all. So anyway, it was hurtful. It was hurtful. So in any case, those were the half-hour interviews, and that's when you can talk to somebody a little longer.
Well, I mean, I'm jealous because you've talked to all the. I mean, I'd like to think in 40 years of comedy, I've met a lot of famous comedians. You've probably met more than I have. You interviewed Tim Allen, on Nichols at Night.
Yep.
Did you interview Bill Cosby at night?
Never.
Because most of his audience was already sleepy at that point.
I never interviewed him. He did come to Channel 15 in Wisconsin when I was working there, and to shoot some promos for the Cosby Show. But I never saw him there. I never saw anything, and all the glasses were carefully put in the dishwasher.
Exactly. So Tim Allen.
Yeah.
Because this is what Tim Allen, Seinfeld. Anybody who was on a Channel 9 show, probably.
Yeah. So like Drew Carey.
Yeah.
And all the guys from Drew Carey. We didn't do Roseanne, but we had all the guys from Drew Carey. We had all the guys from Full House, Dave Coulier, and all those guys who you're contemporaries
Bob
with.
Saget. I know those guys. Yeah.
And we had all the home improvement people. So if it was an ABC show in that era, I probably interviewed
Jerry Lewis. The telethon used to be on ABC.
Yeah, I never interviewed him in person. I saw him once at the telethon because I was a kid. I was living in Las Vegas.
Weren't you doing like the local part? I mean, the telethon back in the day was like a big deal. I mean, it was something that we all talked about. It was 24 hours.
Yeah. So what happened here locally is that Brian Busby and I think I'm not going to remember who else. Brian Busby, Johnny Rollins, and somebody else would host the main primetime parts. And you'd
be the celebrity picking up the phone?
Yeah, I'd be the one out in the car changing the oil in their car. But Maria and I and Johnny Rollins hung around. We would do kind of the overnight hours. And we would go on and be there in the middle of the night. So that was fun.
But you didn't get to meet him?
I never met Jerry. I saw him in person at the telethon when I was a kid.
All right, well, let's go because I've asked you about the mail guy. Tell me about how you got Marilyn May and Vicki Lawrence on your show.
Well, Marilyn May is just a legendary, wonderful person.
Yes.
And the first time I met her, I did a little interview with her over at Johnson County Community College. She was going to be performing there, and I'd never met her before. And we just clicked. We just hit it off. And I interviewed her so many times on a variety of different shows. And the idea that she had been on Johnny Carson more than any other singer, it's like 75 times or something like that, was just this cool thing for me as a kid who had grown up watching Johnny Carson. And she always had stories, and she always was a delight, and she was great. Vicki Lawrence popped up, always usually promoting things. They were promoting.
She was here at the New Theater. Maybe that's where it was.
And then a lot of New Theater people like Don Knotts and Jack Klugman, and a lot of people like that who younger people may not have a real fix on, but for me it was cool.
Vicki Lawrence, she did Mama's Family within the Carol Burnett show, which is almost kind of like how The Simpsons was within Tracy Ullman. But Mama's Family was kind of like a prelude to Married with Children and a whole genre of the.
And it was set in Raytown, Missouri.
What?
Mama's Family was set in Raytown, Missouri.
No way.
Yes, it was. They were in Raytown, Missouri. That's true.
What is it? Well, actually, it does figure.
I wouldn't lie to you. They were set in Raytown.
If you've been to the Raytown Dollar Tree, you could probably see the central cast.
It is absolutely
everybody
true.
Come here, right?
It's absolutely true.
That is true.
Yeah, it is true.
I'm gonna have to look back. Was she from Raytown? Or
no, I don't know how it happened. I just know that was the case.
Oh my gosh, I did not know that. Well, what about Carson or any Letterman?
I never got a chance. Those would have been people, we've talked about this before.
Those are NBC folks.
If I had a chance to interview people that I didn't get a chance to interview, obviously Letterman and Carson, Conan, there would have been just a bunch of them. That would have been fascinating for me to talk to. I would have loved it. As far as the Tonight Show is concerned, the integral player from the Tonight Show that I did interview several times with Doc Severinsen. So I talked to Doc quite a bit.
Really? Yeah. David Brenner?
Never talked to him.
You know, I'm hurt that you don't have these. These are kind of like,
I don't, but I mean, Doc was great and had a lot of memories of the Tonight Show. And Steve Allen, who a lot of people may not know, but without Steve Allen, there may not be a Tonight Show.
But here's my question. You know, when you're interviewing Richard Pryor or Doc Severinsen or Marilyn May that this is special. Why aren't you saying somebody taped this? Somebody saved this for me. This isn't just like the normal Tuesday show.
Some of them, like the Nichols at Nights, a wonderful person at Channel 41 did save most of those. So some of those I would have access to, I think. But I just never thought that way. And it was a mistake, even in terms of ever wanting to get another job. I never had stuff to build a reel out of. I just never saved stuff. I enjoyed the moment. I had fun with it, and then I did.
Well, I mean, but for these people that have been on as long as you, it's almost like a historical reference to have these. I would get, and you withstanding, I would love to see anybody, any other local broadcaster who got a chance to interview for that particular thing, Wilder and Pryor. I would love to see that. But the one person you did see that's currently on late night, you actually got to be on Seth Meyers.
Yes.
Now, how did you pull that off?
He was celebrating his second anniversary of his show, and I was at Channel 41, which is an NBC affiliate. And they invited about a half a dozen, well, I think about 5 NBC affiliates to come out and interview Seth Meyers on the event of his second anniversary. It was also when he decided to quit doing a monologue where he stood out there and did it behind the desk, which was kind of a big deal.
Time for a closer look.
So he did that. And I just happened to, the nice people at 41 said, would you want to go do this? I said, I would love to do this. So I flew to New York and walked from my hotel down to Rockefeller Center and
is it the same kind of the thing as Scrooged and everything like that?
Yeah, well, there were 4 other people.
So it wasn't as big a cattle.
No, there were about 5 of us, and we watched the show that night. And then when the show was over, we would kind of go in and sit down with him and talk to him.
How long did you get with him? Wait, did he air that segment, or was the segment played back in Kansas City? Or
it was for here.
Okay.
So I don't know, we maybe had 15 minutes that we could talk.
And you gave him the requisite barbecue?
I gave him my Monarchs t-shirt.
Okay. Something they would keep.
Yep. So I gave him that, and I said to wear it around Jason Sudeikis just to drive Jason crazy. See, here's what I've got. And he could not have, he was everything you'd hoped he would be. He was clever and funny and interesting, and then we had to shoot promos for the station, and he was great about that. And I asked him in that interview, because it was, Donald Trump was just getting to where he was going to run, I think. And I said, do you have any sense of responsibility when you were at the Correspondence Center, that this was kind of goading him?
He did it, yes.
And he said, well, I don't really think that probably played much of a role.
Oh, hey.
But as I watched things unfold, I thought, you know what? I wonder if that didn't play something.
It did. I blame him. So have you met the holy trinity of comedy? A few weeks back, I went to the Big Slick show, actually. So have you met Sudeikis, Rudd, Siegel, and Stone Street?
I've never met Paul Rudd. I know his mom, and I interviewed his dad years ago, who was an expert on the Titanic.
What?
Yeah. His dad was an expert on the Titanic, and I interviewed him about that.
I heard that he worked for TWA or something like that, and everything like that.
Yeah, he just was, he knew everything about the Titanic. So I've never met Paul Rudd, but I've talked to Rob Riggle. I've interviewed him. David Koechner a couple of times, and
Sudeikis.
Sudeikis, yep.
What did you interview Sudeikis for? Was he coming through?
Well, he was in town to promote the first Big Slick, I think.
Okay. It's amazing. I mean, like I said, I would imagine Paul Rudd would have loved to see that. You should have. We need to find a way to get you these.
Well, the thing is, like with Sudeikis, here's what's funny about that story, and it has nothing to do with me. It has to do with my son. When Jason Sudeikis, first of all,
improv,
Jason's
comedy
mom,
sports.
Yeah, Jason's mom and dad are great people,
Uh-huh.
and so I've known them for years, and they could not be nicer people. But I never really knew of Jason Sudeikis, and then he's on SNL, and he comes back to town to kind of do an improv training kind of weekend. And my son, my oldest son, who was very interested in comedy and improv, signs up for it and goes to it. It's down in City Market somewhere, and he goes up to Jason Sudeikis and introduces himself and says, they have a little conversation during lunch, and my son Alexander is feeling pretty good about that. And Sudeikis finishes most of his sandwich and sets it down and goes off to do something. So my son takes that sandwich and wraps it back up and brings it home. And for years, it was wrapped in tinfoil.
Are you serious?
In our freezer.
Are you serious?
The Jason Sudeikis sandwich.
Oh my God.
It may still be in our freezer. So it was there for years.
So that you keep. That you keep, right?
Yeah, that we
don't
got.
have a Richard Pryor interview, but we got that.
If I could figure out how to get that
Rubin.
sandwich to play on my DVD player, we'd have some. But
that would you
so
keep.
anyway, it may still be there. But that was such a cool moment for my son. And then years later, one of my son's improv groups performed on the same bill with one of Jason Sudeikis' improv groups, and they got to reacquaint each other.
Now, your son actually is into improv now,
Yeah,
right? And
he's a writer, comedian,
and everything like that.
Yeah.
And I look forward to seeing. So let me ask you this: is there anybody you met, because you can be honest, you're not in the game, but is there any celebrities that weren't what you thought they were going to be? They were jerks. Or are you still harboring some that you might run into them, so you're going to hold back?
No, I wouldn't. I know. I would preface this by saying that almost everybody I've ever been lucky enough to interview, from John Cleese to Kevin Bacon, Billy Bob, they've turned out to be great people. Really, genuinely nice.
Because you had excellent questions.
Patient, forgiving, good people. But there was one guy in particular, and I don't want to besmirch his name because he has passed away, and we should not speak ill of the dead.
Okay.
But I will tell you, he was
Milton Berle.
He was on, Milty, Uncle Milty. Milty, put that away.
I only take out enough to win.
Nobody's interested. You and your son, please leave the sauna. In any case, no. There was on MASH, the TV show MASH.
Yes.
The actor who played Charles Emerson Winchester.
Yes.
Was in town.
David Ogden Stiers.
Yeah, he was in town. I can't always remember the name, but he was in town to do Peter Pan out at Starlight. Mm-hmm. And he came to.
I can't imagine him in tights, by the way, but go on.
Well, it was a stretch. Thank you very much. You really need a band, Elliot. So anyway, he comes down to promote his appearance, and there was a woman who worked at Channel 9 forever named Betty, who was great. And Betty ran our cameras during the day, and she also had edited all the MASH episodes so you could fit a few more commercials in. Mm-hmm. So she had watched every MASH episode as she edited them together. And she ran cameras for my little talk show. And everybody who came on that talk show, from Steve Allen to Don Knotts to Phyllis Diller, all of them hugged Betty and talked to Betty and treated Betty like the queen that she was. So David Ogden Stiers, he comes in, and he says the first thing he said to me was, "I will not talk about the M word," meaning MASH. I will not talk about
what?
MASH. And I said, "Really?" I said, "Why not?" And he goes, it ruins the memories for me, and there's nothing new you could ask, so I'm not going to talk about it. And I said, "Okay." I'm thinking, I've got 22 minutes to talk to you, and I'm sorry, I'm not that familiar with I didn't say this out loud, but in my head, I'm thinking, I'm not that familiar with the rest of your resume.
There any other work?
So then Betty, who I loved and was great and smoked like a chimney all of her life, walked up to him and said, "I've watched every episode of MASH." And he looked at her and said, "I don't give a damn," and sat down. And all of us are like, nobody talks to Betty that way.
No.
We do the interview. We get to the third segment of the interview. And I said,
"You got to be seething." And
I'm angry because of how you treated Betty mostly. And we get to the third segment. And I said, I've got to bring something up for our viewers. They're going to be wondering why I haven't asked you about the M word, because we haven't talked about that. And I don't want you to talk about it because I know you don't want to, but at least tell us why you won't talk about it. And then he went back to how it ruins his memories. There's nothing new to ask. It's dead and gone. And he said, "I've done so many things since then that I would rather talk about." And I said, "Okay, well, what, for example?" And he said, "I did voiceovers for the Bermuda Tourism Bureau." And I'm thinking, come on, man, MASH. But we finished the interview, and he just turned out, and I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but he turned out to be a guy who just treated Betty so badly. And I thought, I've talked to Ed Asner, and he would talk about Lou Grant. I've talked to Don Knotts, he would talk about Barney Fife. I've talked to these people about their iconic characters, and they all will do it. Why not?
Well, that's what you're known for. First of all, Jimmy Walker's a little bit like that. He won't say dynamite.
Right. He does for these new commercials you see on TV now.
Because they're paying him. Right? Yeah. You ask him to say dynamite, he won't say anything.
Yeah.
But I mean, Vanilla Ice has no problem saying "Ice Ice Baby" for the rest of his life, right? That's what you're known for, right? You've got to, at some point in time, you have to come to terms with,
This is your thing, and you should be proud of it. And But that
William Shatner in his book, he used to hate Trekkies, and then he came to love it, and he would go on and he'd appreciate it and savor that later in life and everything like that. I just can't believe.
Yeah. So that is, he is the only
like
one.
His character, though, right?
A little bit like Charles Emerson.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't. He may have been an absolutely wonderful, warm, delightful person with other people, but he was so. And the funny thing is, I mentioned to our general manager at the time at Channel 9, he said, "How did that go?" Because he happened to be walking out at the same time. I said, "Well, he's kind of mean to Betty." I said, "This is what he said to Betty." He goes, "We're not going to air that show." And I said, "Well, we kind of have to. I mean, it's a half hour, and we promised Starlight we would air it." I said, "But," he goes, "Well, if it was up to me, we wouldn't air it." We did air it because of the
nobody knows him for anything else.
I just thought, if you don't want to talk about MASH, tell me that, and that's fine, and we did. He told me it, but don't talk to Betty that way.
No. Well, they have to realize a lot, and I think some point in time that they know. It's kind of like, bless your heart, if somebody, any of the Gilligan's crew. I think only Ginger's still alive, but Dawn Wells passed away.
Right.
Do you ever interview her?
I did interview Dawn Wells.
Oh my God. She went to Stevens College. Was she nice? Please tell me she was nice.
She was incredibly nice. And she signed a
she's
cookbook.
High on weed.
She
signed
a. Well, there was a little, you got sort of a contact there.
Oh my God.
But that's why they went through so many lemon meringue pies on that set, because they had to have the munchies forever. But she signed a nice little cookbook to my wife and everything. She could not have been nicer. Nice.
I could tell a little that I'm old when my son was dating, and I said, "Well, she's kind of like a Ginger or Marianne," and he had no idea.
Right, and that used to be
that was just
that was a continuum.
It was, and then it went from Ginger Marianne to Phoebe or Rachel, right, and then I don't know the reference. I ran out of TV. Well, I want to ask you about, before we get out of here. This is one thing that's iconic that I saw. It's another tape you don't have. It's kind of like the end of Blade Runner, like Tears and Rain.
Yes,
you have so
what
many
else don't I
different
have?
sketches.
What else don't I have?
That you don't. I mean, I'm upset that we don't have these. That they're gone. But I mean, on the Tonight Show, they got rid of the old kinescopes, right?
Yeah.
I mean, all this stuff. So only it was special that they would.
Carson used to say that NBC put all of his shows on highly flammable acid film.
So you almost were a murderer, sir.
Yeah.
Almost. Yeah. And I've actually seen this footage, actually. And not just, the way that my wife would murder me with the pillow over the head or mushrooms.
Right.
This is pretty much, this is Billy Bob Thornton Fargo season 1 type murder with an axe.
Stuff.
Yeah, axe stuff. So what happened with this?
Well, I was doing morning live shots for Channel 41. And we went to the sports show, I guess it was. And when you do at least when I do morning live shots, I like to be involved. I like to have some fun. I don't want to just stand there and say, this is this and that and the other. I want to do something. So that particular morning, I did a little zip line that they had set up.
Okay, you did that.
So I did that.
Works fine.
And I walked over and I got into a big pool and showed how the scuba diving stuff worked.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the things was throwing an axe. And I had never thrown an axe before, but there was this team.
But you didn't mind having a shot at it.
No,
right?
And this woman who ran the little booth, she said, everybody can do it. It's going to be great. You're going to have fun. And so they give me an axe.
And what do you have to throw it at?
Just this little target.
How far down the wall?
I would say it was 10 feet. It might have been more. It might have been a little more. Not much. Maybe from... Maybe
here to Joseph, here to the camera. Okay.
So, and I thought maybe when I first saw the thing, I thought, well, this isn't a real axe. It's going to be, but it's a real axe. I mean, it's an axe. So she kind of took me through it, and one of her people did it. Boom! Right in the heart of the thing. And so
now it's a challenge.
So now it's live TV, and I'm on, and I take this axe, and I go, and it goes all the way over the top, and clunk, 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 bang, bang.
I hear that.
And I'm just waiting for somebody to scream. And I'm waiting for like a dismembered whatever to roll back. And the anchor people back at Channel 41 were just losing their marbles because it was so funny to see.
It was
because they saw it go and over the top and hit
saw that.
Who knows what?
I know. I mean, if somebody was walking
back, that would have been that.
Yeah, that would have been it. You'd actually done the crime, and Exhibit A would have been you. They would probably play the scuba. And
I would have been the top story that night.
Yes.
Washed up weatherman kills worker at Bartle Hall.
Of course, then you probably would have had to field dress the victim because it was kind of a
and it would have eventually, by now, it would have become a 6-part podcast in which you know
a
everything at first,
a true crime.
but then they spend 5 more things telling you why you already knew it.
All right. So we're kind of have something in common because I had an airport contract forever, and that's kind of come in. You're done you're kind of done with the local broadcasting, I think, for the time being, right? If you could live anywhere else besides Kansas City or Madison, where would it be?
Ireland.
Oh, that is a quick answer. That's just like that.
Absolutely.
Go back to the family land there.
Yep.
So what are you doing now with your time? I know you teach at Johnson County Community College. You taught my daughter Chloe in class.
Your sister or your daughter, Elliot?
My daughter, who actually is responsible, is my sister. Actually,
there you go.
But
yes, I still teach Johnson County Community College. Teach a broadcasting course there. I work down at Science City at Union Station, talking to families and kids and people like that, and whatever freelancey kind of things come up, I do some of that.
How do people get a hold of you if they want a freelancey thing?
Well, they can find me in my car right outside the studio. I will be wearing the same clothes. If you don't like the outfit, that's too bad.
Pay him.
But but you know, the funny thing, I don't know, this is old man talk again too, but Bill Grigsby, the great Bill Grigsby.
Yes.
The voice of the Chiefs. When I first started.
Legend, iconic.
Yeah. When I first started here, he called the station very early on after I started, and I'd never met him. And he just called to say, welcome to town. It's good to have you here. Thanks, whatever. And I thought, wow, that's really neat. And I asked people, I said, who is this guy that just called me? And they said, well, he's the iconic Bill Grigsby and whatever. So from that day on, I interviewed him a lot on my talk shows too over the years. And we had such a wonderful relationship, and I just thought the world of him. Well, at one point, my contract at Channel 9 had expired, and it wasn't a malicious thing. It just was the news director at the time had kind of spaced it, and several of us just didn't have contracts. And I thought, wow, I don't have a contract. Maybe I should try to find something else. So I called Bill, and I said, Bill, I don't have a contract right now. Is there any other job that I could maybe do that you would know about? And he said, well, let me look into it. So he called me back. And he said, I'll call this person, call that person. So I called one person. It was for a company at the time called Cerner. I don't know whatever happened to him. And I did a phone interview. It went nowhere, and because they're smarter than I am. And I ended up signing another contract. And I saw Bill then a couple months later. I said, Bill, I'm very disappointed. I wanted to get a job outside of television, and this is 20 years ago. And you didn't help me, and I'm very hurt. And he said, I don't want you to get out of television because I like watching you, and when I die, you've got to do all the things I'm doing. And so when I go to Science City and I talk to families and I talk to people, I think, well, maybe this is kind of what Bill would want me to do.
Well, I mean, think about it. Not many people have 20-plus year runs in local media anymore.
That's true.
It's a rarity. It's a rarity. You're a unicorn. He's a unicorn. And have you caught up in maybe doing the spokesman for jazz? Jazz!
Yeah. It's, I really think that I've been really lucky. I've met so many interesting people. I've worked with great people. And I just don't have any regrets about the people part of my job.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you being on, Joel Nichols.
My pleasure.
Thank you for 2 shows. Joel Nichols, it's been on the last show on Televida. Thank you again.
My pleasure.
Good night.